Hey everybody, hope all is well with you and that things are cool in your world. I wanted to take a second here and thank you guys for tuning in and viewing all the content on the channel. I'm going to keep trying to put more up there. If you can do me a favor and subscribe and like and comment and all that stuff, helps me keep motivated to share these stories and all the rest of it. So I really appreciate your time watching this stuff, so thank you. Today, I figured I'd kind of go in a little bit of a different direction. I've had several people asking me to talk a little bit about my background and myself and how the heck I got involved with, working with GG and Tiny Tim and some of the other stuff, and they were asking, just tell a little bit about myself. Now, understand that I don't think I've ever taken a selfie in my life, and I'm not really too terribly comfortable being in front of cameras, so take that for whatever it's worth. And, hearing my backstory is probably like watching paint dry or, corn growing, so you've been warned. Anyways, so I was born in Cleveland, Ohio, and when I was in 5th grade, me, my mom, and my sister moved to Florida, Fort Pierce, Florida, a little coastal city north of West Palm Beach. I had a really unconventional upbringing. There was no beaver cleaver, no white picket fences. It was, everybody, a lot of people have had tough times growing up or whatever, so it's just part of life. But it wasn't conventional, and sometimes it was a little challenging. So one of the outlets that I found to help deal with this was I got really heavily into skateboarding. And this was in the early 70s, when skateboarding really kind of took off and all the skate parks were popping up all over the country. And, I used to skate a lot, and that was my outlet. In particular, I was into freestyle skateboarding because a lot of times I skated, at nights or whenever I didn't have rides to the skate park or whatever. I was just kind of getting out there, and I got kind of good at it. So as time went on, I kept skateboarding and getting a little better, and then I got sponsored, and I started entering the contest scene, the circuit or whatever in Florida at that time. And actually, some of the people that were skating at that time, one in particular was Rodney Mullen, and he was in the division below me. He was from Gainesville, and like I said, I was from Fort Pierce. So we'd see each other always at the skate contests, and at that time, Rodney was in the age division right below mine. Thank God. Because you could tell Rodney was just going to be special even at that point. He was skating for Bruce Walker in Melbourne at that point. I remember when I had to stop skating because I needed to eat, needed to work, etc. But I remember the time that I stopped and then was going to restart. I went to a contest in Gainesville actually, and I hadn't seen Rodney skate in a few years, and oh my gosh, I was never so blown away. It was funny because actually at that contest, the organizers asked him to please not enter. He was still amateur at this point, and just to do a demo, which he did. He was just so damn good, and then his career just took off after that. But anyway, so I did pretty good on the Florida skate scene circuit, whatever you want to call it, at that time in freestyle. I made it in the Ollie book and was skating for a little down in Hollywood, Florida. Here's a picture of the little team in the book, written by my buddy Craig Snyder. Excellent book. If you guys are into skating and haven't read or have that, you need to. Really good stuff. So anyways, as time rolled on, like I said, I had to go to work, and I needed money and needed to live, and so I went to work, and my skating career was kind of ended at that point. From there, I moved up to Daytona Beach and worked for these crazy Irish people in a liquor store. These people were nuts, and they were that too was extraordinarily unconventional. Friends had come by, and they just couldn't believe how chaotic and out of hand it was. Excuse me, I let the dog do her thing. Anyways. So, at that point, I was, skateboarding introduced me into the punk rock. I kind of got way into music at that point, and, Skateboarder magazine was doing interviews with Devo and the Ramones, and, it's kind of during that point where I bought the Sex Pistols album and was just blown away. Never mind the Bollocks blew me away. So was very much into the whole punk rock at that time, living in Daytona, and there was a woman there who had this kind of little punk rock boutique called Mommy Dearest, and she was also putting on shows in Daytona at the time. She put on Black Flag, which you could see a picture in the Stephen Blush book when they briefly talk about Florida, and they show a picture of Casey Chaos, buddy of mine, rest in peace, Casey, at the show. Well, that was at a place called 20 Grand, and the audience destroyed the place. So they weren't going to have punk shows there again. So she was bringing another band into town at the time, Bad Brains, and the club was like, no way, no how, they're not playing here. So she finally found a place that would actually have the show, and that was in a gay club in Daytona Beach called the Zodiac. Here's the flyer for it. Well, my first band, Red Tide, not to be confused with the Canadian band Red Tide, we opened up for the Bad Brains that night, and it was just unbelievable. I'll probably do a video story about it just because it was such a weird event opening up for them in a gay club. The weather was bad. There was maybe 15 people there. Really funny stuff. I ended up hanging out with the Bad Brains in their Winnebago and blah, blah, blah. It was a really interesting evening. At that time, I was super into Roots Reggae music. And so I had a lot in common with those guys. And when I say Roots Reggae, I'm talking about the stuff in the late 60s, 70s, like, the Mighty Diamonds, Culture, Bunny Wailer, Eka Mouse, Toots and the Maytals, this sort of thing. Anyways, let's see. Some pretty bad stuff happened to me in Daytona. Some people accused me of doing something very bad that ended up, for the next several years, I had to legally fight my way out of this with no money, basically. And so I moved back to Fort Pierce from Daytona. A friend, the guy used to sponsor me skateboarding, Mark Caslow. He had a boat building company. He was building Maverick boats and also doing repair. So I worked with him for a while, and until I could fight my way out of this situation, which I did successfully. Long story. Really, really sucked. More about that maybe another time. Anyways, once that happened, I was in Fort Pierce at the time, and during all that, me and my mates, we started a band called Foul Existence. We lived and rented this old hippie/surfer house that was right in the Indian River, and it became known as Foul Manor. And we were doing shows out in the woods, and I got arrested once for singing. I mean, it was a disaster every time we played. The cops would be there all the time. And here's some pictures of the backyard show that I did, or that we did, I should say, before I left to move to New York City, which that was my next stop. Was I moved up to New York City and was going to go to film school there at Hunter College. A friend of mine was going there and encouraged me. So I was young, and this was in 1984, 85, something like that. And I just said, whatever. I threw all my crap in a little small U-Haul and hauled ass up to New York City, and found a little place there on 9th Avenue and 45th Street, right there in Times Square. I found a little sublet, which was a miracle. To this day, people say I was just insane for doing that, but whatever, it all worked out great. And at that time, there was so much cool music happening, and especially in New York. Great venues everywhere, Irving Plaza, the Limelight, Danceteria, and of course, CBGB's, which is where I was pretty much every Sunday afternoon. I'd go down there and watch the hardcore matinees, and there was just so many great shows for that. I think I lived there a year. Great shows ever, legendary stuff. The hardcore reunion of the Bad Brains, the legendary Butthole Surfers show in Danceteria. Saw all kinds of killer shows there. Lots of fun. And actually, one of my favorites was seeing the Residents with Snakefinger playing guitar. Wow, he was something else, and they are something else. Still to this day, one of my favorite bands. Anyway, so let's see. So from New York, I got turned down for financial aid. So, I couldn't go to school there, which was my point of being there. Although it was fun, I worked at a little cigar store right where it was at Broadway and is it Fifth Avenue intersect? There's the Flatiron Building. I'm sure you guys have seen that big triangle building. I worked at a little cigar store right across the street from that and delivered cigars all over Manhattan, and whatnot for a year. It was pretty cool because I got to know the city really well and, lots of fun. New York was really cool back then in the mid 80s with the music scene, and it was just really vibrant, really cool stuff. Anyway, so I ended up not getting the financial aid, couldn't go to school, and I was like, well, that was my goal. I wanted to get into college, so I said, screw it, moved back to Florida, and went back to Fort Pierce, got my associates at a little community college there. And, I was living there when the Harbor Club, the GG Allin Harbor Club show happened, and that's when I was like, oh, wow, holy smokes, what's this guy all about? And then the rest is history. We, I saw the show, then I moved over to Tampa to go to the University of South Florida to finish, that's where I got in touch with Gigi, and, he was at that point incarcerated in jail. And you can check the other stories. I just did one about the Ann Arbor incident that kind of talks about the beginning of our working together and our relationship. So that, that evolved as time went on, and, he came to the place, and we did all the stuff. I went to North Carolina, and met him there, and then he came to my place, recorded Carnival of Excess, blah, 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 all the rest of that stuff. Then he parted, we kind of parted ways and whatever. So, of course, we kept in touch, constantly, because we had done the recordings at that point, and I was trying to get cash together to get them out. And Gigi was pissed at me because I wasn't able to do that. In fact, I remember going to that Youngstown show, which was the last place I saw GG alive, and I was able to purchase a vehicle, get a bank loan for a vehicle, and he was cranky because, I couldn't get a bank loan to put the record out, but I was able to get a bank loan for a vehicle, and, it was just Gigi being Gigi. So, anyways, let's see. So from Tampa, I ended up moving to Columbus, and that's where I kind of started Vinyl Retentive Productions. And my first release, well, actually, I put out the Bleeding, Stinking, and Drinking cassette while I was still in Tampa. Then when I moved up to Columbus, you'll notice if you have those, there's a Tampa address on one and a Columbus address on the other. Anyways, so that's why I kind of really got Vinyl Retentive kind of quote-unquote going, if you will, and, put out the little Son of Evil 7-inch and did a couple releases of the Carnival of Excess CD. Actually, one was on Vinyl Retentive, and then I did another one on what I called Rockside Media, which was a limited edition run of the original mixes, not the digitally remastered, or the second mixes, but the original mixes, which they're pretty close, but a little dirtier than the other ones. And before Kramer from Shimmy Disc, I had him digitally remaster both Carnival of Excess and Tiny Tim, Prisoner of Love, and he worked with me on the Sleepy LaBeef Roots album as well. So it was a nice tie into some Butthole Surfers, ex-Butthole Surfers personnel with the GG and Tiny Tim stuff. Anyways, I'm rambling on a little bit here. So Columbus, I ended up, I was working in a marketing agency in Columbus, and actually produced a Victoria's Secret Super Bowl commercial, which is kind of cool. And I always thought it was funny that, I'm working on this Victoria's Secret Super Bowl commercial, and then, working on GG Allin Outskirts of Life video at the same time. Heidi Klum and GG Allin, what a pair. Tyra Banks, good stuff. Anyway, so from Columbus, let's see what happened then. I moved to, I can't even keep track of all this stuff. Where did I move to after that? I can't remember. There was one or two moves, and then I found I ended up in Detroit, and that's where I kind of, converted what was left of Vinyl Retentive. I think the last thing I did was I brought Jim Carroll to town to do a spoken word performance, which was really cool. There's one or two videos on the channel from that evening. Anyways, then, like I said, I landed in Detroit, and that's where I started Punk, Punk Media, and kind of started getting these releases going a little more, and kind of where, things are right now. I should mention when I was in Columbus doing Vinyl Retentive, that's where I was did the Tiny Tim recordings. There was a mutual friend who actually was friends with Joe Coughlin, and that's how I got to meeting Tiny, is he was a friend of not only Gigi's and Tiny Tim's, but I was talking to Joe Coughlin one night, and he had mentioned he was going to go see Tiny, and I said I'd love to do recordings with him. Well, a week later, Tiny Tim was on the phone with me, and we were planning out Prisoner of Love. So that's how that all came about. So when I got to Detroit, that's when I kind of got the label going, and did the Sleepy LaBeef album in Detroit, and started putting all this stuff out, and there was lulls and ebbs and flows of this. I'd never intended to start a record label. I still don't consider Punk a record label. I consider it some sort of living organism that is the creation of a lot of people. There was a lot of talented people that have worked in putting this stuff all together. Paul Reller, he's the one who produced and played drums and accordion on the Carnival of Excess, and he's the one who pretty much is responsible for not only Carnival of Excess but also Prisoner of Love. Andy Irvine, Ted Brillhart, Bob Widenhofer, Chris Ashenrunner, Kevin Hand. I mean, there's a whole group of people that have worked with me doing all this stuff, and it's kind of funny because Malcolm Tent from TPOS is releasing some of the vinyl. Malcolm and I, we didn't know each other way back in the day, but back when I had the Foul Manor, I was running down to Miami to go to Flynn's because there were so many great bands there. Saw tons of good shows there, and Malcolm was the DJ there. He was living in South Florida at the time, and so we did. It's funny because we always joke about this to this day, how we probably bumped into each other or whatever and just didn't know it at the time, because I used to see his band Broken Talent down there all as well. Anyways, small world with all that stuff, but so that's kind of where it's at, kind of, a little bit about my background or whatever, and, basically my background was, skateboarding, punk rock, and doing projects with these unique, eclectic, some would say odd individuals, and I just really enjoyed it. Some of the other projects or people that I worked with, I worked with Dwayne Peters. We had a little record label for a while called Indian Recordings, and we put out his Checkmate album, and then also Old Scars and Upstarts, which was like this compilation Dwayne did like 5 or 6 editions of that over the years. And, let's see, I was trying to do a project with WWF superstar James, the Ugandan giant Kamala Harris. And him and I, we were in the middle of getting stuff together because he used to make music and still, well, not anymore because he's passed away, rest in peace. But we were talking about, maybe releasing some of his stuff and, it just kind of, we ended up falling out of touch a little bit, and then he got sick, and his diabetes kicked in. He lost both his legs. Then, unfortunately, during COVID, he lost his life. So he was such a cool dude, and very much regret not being able to get that stuff out there. And then also tried to do an album with Abdullah the Butcher. We came close, and we had everything set up to be recorded in Boston, and at that time, Abdullah was a little difficult to work with, and he had some financial expectations that were unrealistic, and those unrealistic views or positions that he held were way out of my scope and league, and of course, nothing ever happened. However, I was talking with Jeff Clayton of Anti-Scene and Malcolm, he plays bass, and they have been in touch, and I think they're working together with Abdullah now to do some sort of studio project. More on that as time rolls, and if you like Anti-Scene and familiar with them, I'm sure you'd be hearing a little bit about that. So anyways, those are some of the other folks, and like I said, I'm always looking to possibly do some recordings with some of these more interesting people, and as you may have noticed, my recordings, when I do these recordings with these folks, I like to take them outside of their comfort zone. GG with the country album, Tiny Tim with the big band album, no ukuleles, Sleepy LaBeef with an all acoustic record, not just a studio band. I mean, I like to take these people outside of their comfort zone, and shake the bottle up and see what we can get. And, so that's where that's all at. Anyways, now that I have bored you guys to tears, and if you've stuck around to listen to this stuff, I really appreciate it. I'm going to be doing more content. I'll probably do a video about that Bad Brains thing, and maybe the Butthole Surfers at that legendary Danceteria show, and some other things. I was at the World Music Festival down in Jamaica, where Peter Tosh and the Clash played back-to-back on the third night of the three-night festival. That was intense and fun. So I don't know, if you guys are into it, I will. If you're not, I understand why you wouldn't want to listen to my dumbass talking about all this stuff anyway. So I appreciate you guys tuning in, though, to check it out. More content, more GG stories and Tiny Tim stuff and all the rest of it coming up. So stay tuned.